Okay, we've been working through this anger topic, and what's become very evident again to me, it's been very real to me over the last number of years in working with people in recovery from addiction and trauma, is that anger is a great big issue. And many of you have shared how it's a really big issue in your life. And what we saw last week is that anger is the emotion that probably escalates more quickly than any other emotion. So in a nanosecond, you go from 0 to 100. Some of you go from 0 to 1,000 in a nanosecond. That's how intense it is. So here's a diagram. So you have the event, but really what is the trigger is not the event so much, but your perception of the event. And so the perception of the event, it could be an accurate perception or it could be a distorted perception. That doesn't matter to your brain because it takes that as fact, and that triggers you, and then you go into this arousal, which can be an instantaneous nanosecond, or it can be a bunch of little things that gradually build. And so what we looked at last week is, what do you do in that nanosecond when you are escalated and everything in you wants to lash out, hurt somebody, say hurtful things, do hurtful things? So we said, rule number 1, bite your tongue and de-escalate. And that is because when anger is triggered, your brain releases a chemical called cortisol, and cortisol gives you the energy through adrenaline to fight or flight, and it shuts down the thinking part of your brain. Basically says, we haven't got time to think about this right now. We got to get out of here, or we got to fight back. So that makes it very difficult to process what's going on when your thinking part is being shut down. So you have to de-escalate before you can bring your thinking part back online. And what we want to talk about now, tonight, is how then do I process what just took place? What do I do? What are tools that will help me figure out what is going on? And the result of the processing, as you figure it out, is you will either let it go and say, this is not mine to take on, this is not an issue, this is just my stuff, not anything to do with them, let it go, or I need to confront them. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is tools to process your anger once you've de-escalated. Now again, a lot of this probably has happened in you. The unhealthy parts of processing have happened at a subconscious place. You haven't been even aware of the fact that you're processing your anger. You might not be processing it well, but you are processing it. So I want to break it down tonight into very usable tools that I hope will help you begin to learn how to process your anger so that you can resolve it. Because the reality, when you use unhealthy tools at a subconscious level to process your anger, it usually never gets resolved in a healthy way. You either stuff it down, build a resentment, lash out and hurt everybody, but nothing gets truly changed that will bring growth and healing. So we want to look tonight at resolving the anger in a healthy way. So we have to start with this. Why in the world are we doing this processing? What's the point? What is the goal? And so the first goal, if I am going to resolve this properly, is I have to see the situation accurately. If I am seeing it in any way distorted, I will probably come to the wrong conclusions about what's really going on. So I need to see this situation accurately. Now that becomes a challenge for many people coming out of complex trauma, because you reach a point in early recovery, you go, I don't know if I trust my perception of events. I might think it's accurate, but it's very likely distorted. And so sometimes in the early days, as you learn to process, you need somebody who's got wisdom and maturity and who knows you, who can help you process the situation so that you can see it accurately, because it is quite possible that if you try it all on your own, you won't see it accurately. Okay, now here's kind of, just to get you going, to see it accurately, what I'm really saying is, what is the cause of my anger? Is it because I've been hurt? I've been disrespected, rejected, abandoned? Is it something from my childhood that got stirred up again and triggered that I've never dealt with that's causing the anger? Or is it because there's been a violation of love? There's been a lack of truth, justice, or respect? That's what's causing my anger. So you're starting to look to what is under my anger, what is causing it. Then I would say go next to, what are my expectations right now in this situation? So if you're driving down Portage Ave at 5 o'clock and you expect no traffic, you're going to get angry because you got the wrong expectation. If you're going to visit Mom this weekend and you're expecting her to validate you and say she's proud of you, and she's never done that before in your life, you're going to leave angry that Mom didn't validate you. Well, the problem is not necessarily that Mom's done anything wrong, which she has, but she's not going to face that. The problem is that you had the wrong expectation and you set yourself up to get angry. So you stop and say, what are my expectations right now? Then, is this a boundary issue that's causing me to get angry? Has somebody not respected my boundaries, my privacy, my no? Has somebody just assumed they could walk into my life without being asked, or give me advice or their opinion without being asked? Is that why I'm angry? Is this anger due to a misunderstanding or a miscommunication? They thought when I said be there at 5 o'clock that they meant be at this location at 5 o'clock when I meant this location. There is a misunderstanding. Is that what this is about? Is this part of me not feeling safe, that they've said something or done something that has made me immediately afraid, and that this isn't a safe person or a safe event? Is that what is causing me to go into this anger place? So those are just to get you going. Now, once you've gone through some of that, you come to the next key part, which is this my stuff, their stuff, or is this a blend of my stuff and their stuff? Is there a part that I did that resulted in their reaction, which resulted in my anger? So what's my part? What's their part? Now, when you're angry, you think it's 100% their part, 0% your part. Once you de-escalate, you're able to say, okay, I need to look at this and figure out if this is my part or their part. Now, what you're going to find sometimes is, you know what, this is all my stuff. So I'm angry at them, but it's really because my stuff got triggered, so I just need to let this go. Because there's no point in getting angry at them, and that is an important thing. Sometimes you go, this is all their stuff, or you go, you know what, there's some of mine, some of theirs. Now, if you're a good addict, you're going to go, okay, is it 36% my stuff or 38% my stuff? And you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to figure that out. You're going to overthink it. And so what I say is, don't get too detailed here. You just want to get a sense of the landscape. Okay, now let me go a bit further into this. Is it my stuff? A couple of things that I want you to think about in terms of that. A key part in dealing with your anger is humility. And that means if I have done something wrong, I want to own it. I want to be able to admit that I'm wrong and change it. If I'm not humble, this anger will never get sorted out or resolved. I have to be willing to admit that I'm wrong and own what I did wrong. That is an important starting point. Okay, so now as I process, is this my stuff? I go into a couple of different directions. Okay, so number one, what's my headspace been like over the last couple weeks? So have I been quite depressed and really struggling with depression or having a lot of anxiety? Because if I am, then I'm going to get angry very easily. So this could very easily just be mainly my depression talking because I'm so irritable. Or am I just overtired and exhausted because I haven't been sleeping well? I've been working too late. I've had my mind so busy when I go to bed. If that's the case, an overtired, exhausted person is very quick to lose their temper because they're very irritable. So that could be my stuff. Am I super stressed lately and starting to feel overwhelmed? Because if I'm overwhelmed, I'm irritable. So that again could be my stuff. If I'm discontented and life all of a sudden is boring and I just become negative about everything and critical about everything, I'm going to be angry at everything. And that's all my stuff that is working there. If I all of a sudden get my nose in the air and think I'm a little better than everybody and get self-righteous, I'm going to be irritable because everybody's going to make me mad. That's my stuff. One of the things that I look for in my own life is I have an awareness of, and I think you will too, you just have a natural bubble. And that bubble is, here's my boundary about how close you can get to me without asking my permission to get closer. Okay? So if all of a sudden you want to come up and give me a hug and my bubble's out here, is like, no, you're into my space. Okay? When I'm not doing well in my head, my bubble gets bigger. And so one of the things that I look for in my life is if all of a sudden I'm getting annoyed because somebody's walking into the same room I'm in, then I got some stuff going on here. I need to stop and figure out why my bubble has gotten bigger. And then if I develop a coldness, so if I'm in a good, healthy place, there's a warmth, there's an inviting, there to invite people into my heart. If I'm not doing well, you're going to get met by a wall of coldness. And those are times when I'm more irritable and angry. So a self-inventory is very important. A couple other things that you can be aware of is things that lead to you not being in a good headspace. And by not in a good headspace, I'm talking about you're getting discontent, irritable, negative, dark, angry, irritable. All those things are in your head that are going on there. What leads to that? Well, maybe it's because I've been procrastinating. I've been engaging in mindless distractions again instead of doing what I know I should be doing. I've been letting my limbic brain operate, so I do stuff only if I feel like it. Wow, that's not a good place. If I stay there very long, I'm going to be an irritable person. I'm going to be a discontent person. And so I need to say, over the last couple of weeks, have I been engaged in mindless distractions? Have I begun to just do stuff only if my limbic brain feels like doing it? If so, what is going on here? That is not going to lead to a healthy brain in my life. Next one I ask myself is this. Even though I'm an introvert and I need a lot of time alone, I need a lot of time with people too. So have I been spending too much time alone? Because if I have, I get cranky. And if I've been spending too much time with people, because if I spend too much time with people, I get cranky. So have I lost the balance between alone time and people time? A way to summarize it is this. I will get into a negative, not good headspace if I have not been taking care of myself physically, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally. If any of those areas are not getting healthy attention, healthy self-care, I will gradually descend into a bad headspace. And once I descend into a bad headspace, I'm cranky. And that is my stuff, okay? Next thing, no, just let me stop and say this. If you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, do you want to know what they're going to say to you if you have conflict? They're going to say it's all your stuff. And they're going to use these very arguments, but they're going to twist them and say, you've been negative lately, you've been distractions lately, and it might not be true, but you might believe it. And what they're trying to do is get you to take all responsibility for their anger. So you need to be aware of that. I am talking about you being in a relationship with somebody who's willing to look at their stuff too, so that you both are humble and looking and wanting to accurately see what is going on. A narcissist never wants to see an accurate picture, only a distorted one. Okay, next thing is maybe all of my anger is because an old wound got the Band-Aid torn off of it. I got triggered. Maybe there's a hurt there that I haven't dealt with. And that's why I'm so triggered. Now, usually what happens when an old wound gets triggered is you feel the same age as that time when you got wounded. So if you get angry and it's due to an old wound, usually you feel like that 6-year-old or 8-year-old again, because you're right back there. So a couple things that might help you process that. As you're processing your anger, you can, if you think it might be from an old wound, say, what was the first time this happened to me? So let's say you think that somebody is not seeing you as valuable or smart. When was the first time I ever felt that way? And what that can do is often bring back a memory, and then you know, wow, and you can feel that again, and you begin to realize that has never been dealt with. That's what this is all about. So even though it might be 40 years later, that is still affecting me. And then you can start to heal that. If you're not able to go back to a memory of when it first happened, some people ask themselves, where do I feel this emotion in my body right now? And sometimes that just helps them make a couple connections to some of the old wounds and the memories that you need to work on. Okay, next question I ask myself. So let's say Kim and I are driving home after Finding Freedom tonight, and I get a little bit annoyed with her, and I bite my tongue. Okay, you got to remember that. I bite my tongue, and so I'm processing what's going on here. And one of the questions I'll ask is, what has my relationship with my wife been like for the last month in general? And I need to ask that. So has there been some tension on a regular basis? Has there been little bits of conflict, little bit of shot taking? Has there been a feeling of less respect for them or they for me? Has there been a lack of trust or jealousy? What's the relationship been like? Is there been a bit of a distance? Have we not had times to really connect and have true intimacy? Because if that's the case, then that is on me. Because that relationship and the lack of respect that is beginning to develop affects the irritation I feel by what Kim does. And so that is another important question. So there's going to be a lot of relationships where I get angry with a person and I go, I don't even know this person. So that I can't even think about pursuing solving that with them or resolving that with them. I'll probably never meet them again. I just need to resolve it internally and let it go. So the person that you're angry with, what's the depth of the relationship? How close is the relationship? And if it's a close relationship, how healthy has it been over the last little while? Okay, now let me just stop and give you a couple of things to note. As you're processing, you've cooled down, you've started to process. Guess what's going to happen as you start thinking about things? You're going to re-escalate. because all of a sudden you're mad again about something they said yesterday. Oh yeah, and then they said something the day before. So you cool down, re-escalate, cool down, re-escalate. So the danger in processing is that you're opening your mind to explore a hurt and the danger of re-escalating. So be aware that it might take a while to get through the processing because you got to keep de-escalating yourself. Second thing I want you to understand, there's some things that people do to me and I get angry and I can process the situation in a minute. But there's other things that I get hurt by and I haven't been able to quite figure out what is going on here. Why is this hurting me and affecting me so much? And it might take me 2 or 3 days to figure it out. So processing is not just one set time and then it will be done. It depends on the hurt. It depends on the person. It depends on the history. All of those things. Some are easier to figure out than others. Third thing I want you to be aware of is this. It is very easy to slide from healthy processing back into unhealthy obsessing about the hurt. So the goal of processing the hurt is to resolve it, to learn and figure out what to do to resolve it. But you can slide back into obsessing on, I got hurt, and go back into a victim mentality, poor me, I'm mad, and turn it into a resentment. So you need to develop a sense of, when do I transition from healthy processing to unhealthy obsessing? And figure out how to stop yourself if you start to go into the unhealthy obsession. Okay, let me just stop and take an aside here. We're talking about processing your anger. But I don't want you to do your processing of your anger just after you've escalated from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond. What I want you to start to think about is there's another tool where you can process your anger before you have escalating events. And so what I mean by this is this. Start every morning by saying, where's my anger at right now? Because if you aren't aware that your anger might be building, that you're not in a good headspace, that you're becoming quite irritable and discontent, and then you get triggered, you might not be able to stop yourself once it escalates. So it's better if you can learn to process every day your emotional state, your headspace state, your anger state, so that you can avoid many escalating events. So I do anger emotion inventory every morning. I do it very subconsciously now, but I started by doing it very consciously, and I do it again throughout the day and at night. And that is a helpful tool for me to be able to figure it out. Now, understand this. I can wake up in the morning, and I get up at 5. I'm the first one up. I get an hour to 2 hours all by myself. It's fantastic. And I can wake up, and I can be meditating and praying and reading, and I go, I feel great. But nobody's walked into the room yet. So I don't get an accurate picture of my emotional state until I'm around people. So that becomes an important thing to factor into your inventory, is it's not until I interact with people or problems that I get the most accurate picture about how I am doing. So then what I realize is this. Sliding into a negative headspace or into greater anger, for most of us, that's a gradual thing. We don't deal with something, we go into distracting behaviors, we procrastinate, all of those things, and suddenly we slide into a worse and worse place. The sooner I can catch that and get my early warning signs that I am sliding into a negative place, the sooner I can turn it around, okay? So I just don't want to do an inventory to find out, am I ready to blow my top? I want to do an inventory to see, are there early warning signs that I'm sliding? That becomes a very important part for me. So every person's going to have their own different early warning signs. For many people with a complex trauma, becoming negative, critical, finding fault with everything is often a warning sign. Isolating or wanting to avoid problems, people, is often a warning sign. So you need to figure out what are the signs or the early warning signs of the dominoes starting to fall that I am getting into a more negative, dark headspace. If you can learn to do that, then you can prevent a ton of anger explosions. Next thing, be aware that there's certain times every day when you're more prone to anger than others. So I don't know if any of you have heard this expression of being hangry. That means you're hungry and nobody's feeding you, so now you're angry. So you're hangry. But we do know that when you're hungry, you're more prone to anger. That's a very interesting fact. Often at the end of the day, you're tired, you're more prone to anger. You just don't have anything left in the tank to give. You want to be selfish for a while. And so your anger, you might be more susceptible. You might be more susceptible on the job with certain types of people or certain types of problems. So the more you're aware of your anger triggers or when you're most vulnerable to anger in a day, the more you're able to protect yourself. So I think all of you know this. Once the dominoes start to fall and you're going towards an angry place and a dark headspace, there's a line that once you cross it, it's a line of no return. You're going to blow up. You're going in that direction, and you're not going to be able to stop it from happening once you cross that line. But if you catch yourself before that line, you can turn it around. And that is really what you're doing this inventory for, is that you can fix problems before they become too big to fix. And then you got a disaster on your hands. Okay, so what do you do if you're sitting there doing your morning inventory and you go, wow, am I ever irritable today? Where do I go next? So I go, let's figure out why. And that's the questions we asked in the very beginning, if it's my part. Am I overtired, stressed, etc.? What I then do is, okay, I got to get a wee bit of time to think, hopefully, so I can figure out what do I need to do to turn this around. So do I need to start saying no to a few things so I can get some more self-care time? Have I taken on too much and I need to stop that? Do I need to change some habits in my life that have got me back into wasting time and empty distractions? I need to figure that out. And then I need to reconnect to myself, spiritually, to those I love, because the reconnection is a big part of what keeps me healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So that becomes big. And then if I'm at the beginning of a day and I'm not in a good headspace, without even realizing it subconsciously, I'm selfish. I want everything to go the way I want it today because I'm in a bad mood and it better go this way or somebody's going to pay for it. I need to be able to say, surrender. Here's what I'm hoping to do today. Here's what I'm planning to do. But if something interrupts that, I'm surrendering those plans. I am not going to hang on to them and lash out at anything that interrupts those plans with a legitimate need. So those are internal things that are important to do. So every person has to figure out, do I accept these interruptions? Do I try to change these irritations? Do I try to change my child? Do I accept my child? They really annoy me, but maybe that's just the way they are, and I can't change that. I just have to accept that. So that is what you're doing internally. Now, the last tool here is prepare yourself for situations where you know you're prone to anger. So let me just give you some common ones. You may not realize it, but we're very vulnerable to anger when we're going through a time of change or entering the unknown. Because all of a sudden, fear, what's going to happen? Am I going to be able to handle it? We're on edge. And as soon as we're on edge, we're very prone to irritability and anger. Secondly, most people look at vacation, and they go, oh, good, chill time. Then they realize they got 4 little people following them around saying, Daddy, entertain me. And your chill time just went out the window. And the problem with vacation, you're with these 4 little rugrats 24/7. And you're going, what happened to the vacation? This is more work than going to work. And so if you don't prepare for that, you're going to destroy your vacation because you're going to be angry the whole vacation that your kids have so many needs. And so you have to be aware of those kind of things. I don't know what you're like, but if you have friends over, usually you want to put your best foot forward. You want things, the meal to be done well, the table set well, everything to be good. And if your kid comes walking through with flipping his diaper around with stuff flying around, you're going to lose it. So you have to realize that when you have company or people visiting, you're less patient for little things. And so be prepared for that. Then you can go to your family get-together, and you might have one sibling that just for some reason, every time you're together, he tells the same story about something that happened to you when you're a kid. When you peed your bed or you peed at school, and he just every time tells everybody, laughs away, and you're just dying inside. But you know he's going to do it the next time you visit. So prepare. When we were first married and we'd go visit family, Kim and I would say to each other, okay, what do I need to be prepared for? Because if I'm not prepared for, I don't want to get blindsided and then flare up. So if I'm prepared for how mom's going to respond, how dad's going to respond, how my brother's going to respond, then I can just go cool. I knew that was coming, not a big deal. Then going to your parents, for most people in recovery, those are your biggest triggers, okay? So dad and mom are going to say something or do something. They're going to guilt trip you. They're going to put you down. They're going to accuse you of being a bad parent or not a responsible parent, blah, 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 and it's going to push your buttons. What will be my response this time instead of anger to respond to that? And if you go through that exercise, you can change the dynamics of your get-togethers with your family because you knew it was coming and you prepared for it and it didn't bother you. And all of a sudden everybody's going to go, oh, that didn't work so well this time. What's going on here? And you're going to upset things. Last thing, be prepared, young parents, for, and you got this in summer holidays when there's no school. It's the same idea as vacation. All of a sudden you got kids all day, every day, and it can cause a lot of anger because you weren't prepared for the demands of that. Okay, done all that processing. You figured out your part, their part. Now you have to decide, do I let it go? So here's the guidelines I would use. Let it go if it's all my issues. That person triggered something from my past, or I'm just in a really negative headspace. It's all my stuff. Let it go. Resolve that internally. Secondly, let it go and don't confront if it's a narcissist that got you so mad, because it'll never get resolved. And so if you try to go and confront and resolve it, they're going to take everything you say and twist it and use it against you to try to make it your fault, and it'll make things worse, and it'll make your anger worse. So I tell clients all the time, if you're angry at a narcissist, there might come a point when you're able to say to them, you're wrong, and not listen and be affected by anything they say and walk out. But if you're not able to do that, don't even go there. because it'll only make you feel worse. Now, let me add this. You might say, that narcissist hurt me. I can't do anything about it. I'm going to let go. 10 minutes later, you're thinking about what they did. Guess what? You got to let it go again. 10 minutes later, you think about it again. You got to let it go again. And so letting go isn't just a one-time thing. You do it once, but then you repeat it and repeat it every time it starts to stir up stuff inside of you again. Final thing I want you to get. Anger, of all the emotions, is the one most people feel powerless to not do what it wants you to do. So anger pulls you in a direction where you want to lash out. You want to hurt them back. You want to beat yourself up. You want to isolate, and you feel powerless to stop that pattern. In other words, you feel like a victim to your anger. It is really important to begin to understand it feels like I'm a victim, but I don't have to be a victim to my anger. I can actually choose to respond differently than how my anger is pulling me to respond. Now, that is easy to say, not easy to do. Because I don't think there's a harder thing to break the power of, next to addiction, than anger. Because it's so powerful, you feel powerless to be able to do anything differently, but you can. You might not do it perfectly for a long time, but each time you can gain your power back. And you can be less of a victim and make healthy choices. So that is an overview of processing your anger. Now, where we're going to go next week is this. Most of us aren't angry just because it's not sunny or it rained. Sometimes we are. Most of our anger is connected to a person and results in conflict. So the next thing after we do our own anger is, okay, what do I do if I need to confront this person? There's conflict now. So that's what we're going to go into next week. So that's the end of part one. Reagan and Bruno are going to come back. And after that, we're going to have the Christian part. If you're not interested in that, you're free to go. Thank you for being part of this first part with us. It was from the Bible around anger. And I want to tell you the story tonight of Israel's very first king, a man by the name of King Saul. If you've never read the story of King Saul, it is a story that to me is a clear evidence of a man with complex trauma. He's a man with huge shame issues, and you see that clearly in the story. Lots of anger and lots of failure that he could not get past. But let me tell you how kind of his story begins. Saul was the most handsome man in Israel. One of the things that I've seen over the years is that people with great shame, they can be the prettiest person in the world and they still feel ugly. They still feel not lovable or not good enough. So Saul was the most handsome man, head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. So again, the context for that is where Israel was at as a nation, is they judged a person's value by the externals, not by the internal character. And so in their mind, a handsome person who's taller than everybody else is the greatest person. So it's twisted thinking, but that's the complex trauma way of evaluating value, is looking at externals. So if you're familiar with King Saul, he becomes king, and then they enter a battle with their neighboring country, the country of the Philistines or Philistia. And the Philistines had a giant by the name of Goliath, and he was around 8 to 9 feet tall, as best we can gather. And so what they said is, let's do something that they did in warfare. Instead of having our two armies fight where there'll be tons of loss, let's have your best soldier fight our best soldier. And so they brought out Goliath, 8 to 9 foot man covered in armor, just a hulk of a man who'd been a warrior since he was a young man. And everybody in Israel did not volunteer. They said, no way we're fighting that guy. We've lost. So they stalled and they stalled. And finally, this little shepherd boy came along by the name of David. He says, why is everybody so afraid? This guy's not just fighting Israel. He's trying to go against what God promised us. So we got God on our side. I'll fight him. And he was just a teenage kid. And his only skill was using a slingshot to protect his sheep. And they said, no, this is a recipe. We're going to lose for sure. And David said, hey, I've killed a lion. I've killed a bear with my slingshot. I'm good with this slingshot. Now, what's very interesting is you read the story of Goliath. Every inch of the front of him was covered with armor except his face. And so David is finally given permission. He goes out and faces Goliath, slings his stone, and it hits him in the forehead. In that little wee area that was open, his skill was sufficient enough that he wiped out their greatest soldier. And Israel won that war. Now, here's what happened afterwards. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed Goliath, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. So King Saul's leading the procession. Soldiers are filing in behind. David is part of that procession. And these women are lining the roads. And they sang and danced with joy and tambourines and cymbals. And this was their song. Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. In other words, David's way better than Saul as a warrior. So what we're told is insecure Saul, with all kinds of shame that he's been trying to compensate for by his position as king, his wealth, his status. Now there's a little kid that surpassed him in everybody's affection. And it says, this made Saul very angry. So what I want to do tonight is take you through what did Saul do from that very angry state. And so he says this, what's this? They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. In other words, he just went to the worst case scenario. And he says, they're praising David today. Tomorrow they're going to say, we want David as our king. And so from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. In other words, he was watching his every move to make sure there wasn't any signs that David was going to try to become more popular and aim for the throne. But then his anger began to affect his mental health. The very next day, a tormenting spirit overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. So Saul's anger is now exploding, and he is just ranting. He's throwing things. He's yelling. He's saying all kinds of things, some that probably wasn't even intelligible. He has just gone off his nut. And so they bring in David because they knew he is also a harp player, and he played his harp to calm Saul down when he started to get agitated. And so as David's playing his harp, Saul had a spear in his hand, and he suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David escaped him twice. So he didn't just do it once, he then did it the next time David played a harp. So he's gone from being very angry to going to this almost like a spirit taking over him, and he's gone like a madman, and now he's throwing spears at David in the palace, wanting to kill him. And that's his anger. Now here's what I want you to get. Over the next year or so, Saul repeatedly tries to kill David 9 different times. So his anger took over his life. He stopped being focused as a king. He stopped being concerned about the needs of the people and the responsibilities of the palace, he became obsessed with what he thought was his competition and killing him. Now, you got to give Saul credit. He was a very smart man. And so he had this thinking, I'm going to kill David, but I'm going to make it look like I'm not part of any of these attempts. So he's going to design these very subtle attempts on David's life that nobody would suspect that he's part of. It's not till the last attempts that it becomes clear to everybody that Saul wants to kill David. And so the first two, he throws a spear. Now that is important just to think about. It would have been very easy if people said, Saul, what are you doing? He would be able to say, oh, I'm just going crazy these days. And so it would be like what we call NCR, or not criminally responsible, because I've lost my mind. And he would have been able to blame his anger and his crazy madman stuff as the reason for him throwing a spear, and that he really didn't mean it. But what is interesting to me is Saul was also a warrior, and he was a good warrior. So he would be able to throw a spear with great accuracy. So the fact that David eluded him twice shows that David was quick on his feet, and he was a very alert man. But David has a heart that just believed the best about Saul. He saw Saul as a surrogate father. And so he's, in his mind, said, Saul is just having a bad day mentally. He still loves me. He didn't really mean that. And he doesn't even suspect Saul at all. Next thing. One of the things is he said, I got to get him killed. How do I do that? Oh, I know what. I'll put him in the army. So right now he's a shepherd and he comes and plays the harp. I'm going to put him in an army, and I'm going to make him over 1,000 men, so he's got to lead his men into battle. And that, well, maybe he'll get shot. Maybe he'll get killed. That's a good place to improve the odds that somebody will die. Stick him at the front of a bunch of troops in a battle. So that's what he does. And then there's a part to that I think he's also thinking, I'm going to get him out of Jerusalem. Because as long as he's in Jerusalem, everybody's paying attention to him and seeing him walk around town. And they're all giving him attention. I can't stand that. I'm going to send him out in the country, to a different country, to fight war. And then maybe people will forget about David. Or maybe he's thinking, everybody loves David now because he killed Goliath. I'll put him in charge of 1,000 men. And maybe he's going to make a bad decision one day and a bunch of men will get killed. And everybody will turn against David. And he'll lose his popularity. So he's got all kinds of different things he's scheming. Problem is, David went to battle, and he was the best general Israel ever had. His troops loved him, and he won battle after battle. That didn't work, but David didn't suspect him. Next one. Saul had promised that the person who kills Goliath can marry Saul's eldest daughter. So that was part of the incentive to try to get somebody to take on Goliath. So now David says, well, Saul says, I got to honor my promise to the person that defeats Goliath. So I will offer Merab, my oldest daughter, to David, but I'm going to add a condition that he has to go and fight the Philistines. Well, Goliath was a Philistine. So basically what he's saying is, there's one nation in the world right now that wants you dead more than any other nation, and that's the Philistines. If you want Merab, you got to go and lead a war campaign against them. I hope you get killed. David won. Oh, sorry. He turned down the offer of Merab, but he won the battle. So he then goes, his second daughter, Michal, goes to him and says, Dad, I like David. I'm in love with David. I would like to marry David. And so Saul goes, oh, what am I going to do now? So he says, well, every marriage has to have a dowry price paid. So I will set the dowry price that if David wants to marry Michal, he has to get 100 Philistine foreskins. In other words, he's got to kill a Philistine, pull down his pants, and snip him 100 times. Surely he's going to get killed then. So he's again just saying, here's a reasonable dowry. You want to know what David did? He came back with 200 foreskins and said, I paid double. Give me your daughter. And he still never suspected anything. But you can see Saul's going to a little more riskier thing. So here's what I want you to understand about anger. The longer you sit in it, the more you throw caution to the wind. The greater the risk you take without thinking stuff through clearly. So then David is still working around the palace in the army. He's becoming even more popular. Finally, one day, Saul talks to those closest to him, his attendants, and he says, kill David. And what he wasn't expecting is they refused to obey him, even though he was the king. And so what Saul was beginning to realize is God is protecting David. God is on David's side. Now you think he would have said at that point, time to give up. Because if I'm fighting David, I'm fighting God, and I'm not going to win this battle. But anger was controlling him. And he was throwing caution and reason to the wind. He says, I don't care if God's on his side. I'm still going to kill him. And the second thing that he didn't count on was that his son, his firstborn son, Jonathan, had become David's best friend. And Jonathan was willing to disobey his father and not kill David. And so Saul began to realize he was losing his power. And so he's starting to panic. So he throws a spear at David again when David's around the palace. And so for the first time, David starts to suspect that Saul is wanting to kill him. It took him about a year, but he's starting to think something's off here. And he's starting to wonder about that. So he's not sure. He still wants to give Saul the benefit of the doubt. And so what he does with Jonathan is this. We got to find or come up with a test to see whether Saul is really wanting to kill me. So what they do is this. There's the full moon festival that Israel had once a month, where all the family and friends got together for a feast. And David would usually join with Saul's family because Jonathan was his best friend, and they had welcomed him into the palace and in the family. And so David says, I'm not going to come this month. Let's see how Saul responds. Because if he wants to kill me, he wants me there so that he could kill me. So they do this test, and Saul realizes David's not there, and he asks Jonathan, where's David? And Jonathan says, and they made up an excuse, David had to go back home to be with his family for this festival. Now here's what happens. Saul boiled with rage at Jonathan, and here's what he says to his firstborn son, and this is where anger can take you. You stupid son of a whore. He is cutting his son with the most hurtful words he can think of. That's where his anger was taking him. So he's not just wanting to kill David now. His anger has morphed till he's hurting those he loves, and he doesn't even care. You stupid son of a whore, he swore at him. Do you think I don't know that you want David to be king in your place? You're the one that should be king. Why aren't you mad too? You're shaming yourself and you're shaming your mother. So he's trying to heap guilt on him. He's disrespecting him. He's shaming him. He's trying to bring mom into it to add weight to it. As long as that son of Jesse, that's David, is alive, you'll never be king. Now go and get him so I can kill him. No longer any mask. No longer any subterfuge. He is out there. I want to kill him. Jonathan says, but why should he be put to death? What's he done? Then Saul hurled a spear at his own son, intending to kill him. So at last, Jonathan realized that his father was really determined to kill David. There's two other attempts. One attempt 8, he surrounds David's house at night with soldiers, and David sneaks down a window and escapes. And then he sends a bunch of soldiers to a place where David's at, and David has to escape again and go into the desert and hide for 10 years. Saul continued to try to kill him for the next 10 years. So do you think of the high cost of anger in Saul? He started with not dealing with his own shame. He got his value from all the wrong things, from his beauty, from his height, from his job, from his position, from the adulation of people, not from really internal stuff. And now David has threatened all that gave him his sense of value, and David has become the enemy. But in not dealing with that anger towards David, what has he lost? His family, even trying to kill his own kid. Then he's lost the nation. They are losing respect for him. He doesn't care about the needs of the people anymore. He's chasing David around the desert with the army. And they're being invaded by other armies, and nobody's stopping them. Saul would lose everything he held dear. He'd lose his family, his country, his job. He would end up being a tired, grumpy, lonely old man. It was a tragic, tragic thing. He lost his sanity. He lost his spirituality. He lost everything. I think Saul, better than anybody, shows us that if we don't deal with anger and we let it sit there and we feed it, we just don't keep it at one level. It keeps taking us lower and lower and lower, and it takes us to places we never wanted to go. But once we get so far, we can't stop ourselves, and the amount of damage and loss is horrific. So I hope we can learn from Saul as an incentive